Welcome to 412 Canada. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kim Hutchins. At 412, we're equipping the church for greater influence through serving. 412 is a ministry of Faith Baptist Church in Huntsville, Ontario. Well, we are so excited to be able to continue to equip you as a podcast and now on YouTube. As I mentioned on our previous episode and in our episode 20 of the 412 Canada podcast, we are not able to have our conference this spring. And so we have a unique opportunity now to encourage and equip you with different guests that we are bringing up each week. Today, we're going to have Birch on, and he was on just in our previous episode, and we had a great conversation about church trends and volunteering through this season and how to create community during this time. So I'm going to welcome Rich on again. He is the executive director at Camp Minneowi and the founder of unSeminary, which I'm super excited to talk about today. Thanks for joining us, Rich.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. This feels like the Kim show. You know, it's like Oprah's got a show. We've got the Kim show. It's good.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm glad that I could have you on as my first guest for the video experience.
Happy to be here. It's good stuff.
Now, you are the founder of unSeminary, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today because I know we didn't get into it last time. But again, so unSeminary is a blog, right?
Yes, it's all those things. A podcast, a blog, online courses. We do coaching and stuff with churches too. So a bunch of different pieces of it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and I love the tagline. What is that again?
It's stuff you wish they taught in seminary. So it's really targeted at church leaders. And one of the things that you'll hear, like a pastor, ministry leader or whatever, they'll often say like, oh, they didn't teach that in seminary. And it's like a shorthand for like, oh, I'm a little overwhelmed. And so unSeminary, we're trying to really help with those things that they don't teach in seminary that ironically, actually, interestingly, we often find are things that are helping churches grow, that are actually helping them reach more people, be more effective. And so, that's what it's all about.
That's good. Well, and before we get into that, and I know a number of your answers are going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about the current pandemic that we're in and how that affects everything that we're doing. But before we get into that, what is something new that you've done in this past year that maybe was fun or exciting or different?
That's a great question. So I would say there's definitely my wife and I have a renewed love for just walking, like just going out in the afternoon, going for a walk. That's been a part of it. Also, so I got like one of those like ride at home bike things, and that's been great. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, and it's been, we were talking about this earlier. When I first got it, I was like, my goal would be to do 50 rides in 60 days. I was like, that would feel like, that's a good steward. Like I'm actually using it, kind of forcing myself to get into it. And I ended up doing like 80 some odd rides in the first 60 days. So I've just loved it. It's been so great and, and fun. And I never was, it's like a spin bike. I was never into spin or any of that before. And have just loved it. It's fantastic. So
that's good. That's so exciting, right? It's so interesting to hear what different people say they've kind of picked up or done that's different in this past year that, you know what, sometimes we just didn't have time to in the past.
Right.
And this is such a new opportunity to try it out.
Absolutely, for sure. That's good.
Well, let's get into the unSeminary, and I specifically, I was looking on your website, and I thought it was so cool. So you've got these cohorts, and you're equipping people, and so how does that work?
Great question. So the cohorts actually started during the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, I was doing coaching on-site coaching with churches. And it wasn't all the time, but it was, kind of a normal, piece of the, which is where I spent my days. And so when the pandemic hit, we ended up kind of pivoting because I wasn't going to get on a plane anymore. And I still had a number of churches that were like, hey, we'd love to keep connecting. Is there a way that we can do something together? And for years, I've had friends of mine that have done like remote cohorts like that, where you get a group of leaders together and, help them kind of journey through a season together. And I've always been like, I'm terrible online. I can't do Zoom. It's not any good. But we decided to try it, and actually, I love it. It's like the favorite thing I do with unSeminary. And so most of them they're all 3 months long, and they're targeted on specific things. So we've been doing an executive pastors one, where it's a group of a dozen executive pastors, and we meet every other week for 3 months. And it's interesting. What keeps happening in those experiences is people come in because they think there's going to be great content. Like they're like, we're going to talk about things that are helpful, and they come in with problems that we'll try to help But actually, people's outcome, what they love, is the fact that they've have a network of friends now across, mostly across the States, but across Canada too.
Yeah.
And then we're doing another one right now that's all focused with churches on the volunteer re-engagement issue, particularly. So it's a group of church leaders, mostly staff, or they're all staff, who are working through the kind of re-engagement question. How are we re-engaging, rebuilding our teams? And so, again, we have content that we provide. I do it with a good friend of mine, Christine Kreischer from Pennsylvania. We do them together, and yeah, we do present content. It's but really the bulk of it is about getting people to talk to each other. We'll talk about that. The expertise is really in the room. It's about helping each other and wrestling with each other's problems, and oftentimes just hearing a part of what those experiences are is there's this hot seat where people come with like a problem from their church, and then we all get a chance to kind of help and give some feedback. And people often say that's like the best part of it. They love the fact that even hearing other people's problems is like, oh yeah, I didn't realize I had that same problem, but now that you say it, we do. Right? And then hearing multiple perspectives, and it's rare for church leaders to get in a room in a place where they feel like it's safe enough to share a problem, and then have people who are kind of in their corner saying, yeah, well, you should try this, or here's some stuff that we've tried in our boat. So that's how the cohort thing works. It's been great. And we'll keep doing it. We'll see. Most of North America is still in some sort of, even in the South, they're still in, kind of dealing with COVID, and so they have really taken a pretty COVID specific. They felt a lot of it's like related to that, and so we'll see kind of as what happens in the coming year or so if we'll keep doing them. But I think we will. There still seems to be strong interest in them.
Yeah, that's so neat. I love how you take that and you equip them, right? And then that trickles down into their churches.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
are they seeing good effects of that in their volunteer culture there?
Yeah, totally. And that's really the goal, is ultimately to help churches. It's a strange season, right? None of us have lived, it's classic unSeminary. None of us were taught in seminary how to lead a church through a pandemic. Yeah. And so, we're all trying to figure it out. And although, it's that saying we keep hearing, we're in the same boat but facing different storms, or in the same storm but in a different boat. Like there's a lot of similarities. Yeah. And it's a unique time because we can learn, because of the way reopening has been happening across North America. There are some churches that are considerably farther ahead than others, and so it's like peering into the future a little bit and be like, hey, let's talk to some kids ministry people in an area that has been open for a while. If you haven't opened kids ministry before, you get a chance to kind of learn what has that been like. So it's been fascinating.
Yeah, and I love this because it kind of ties in. I've been reading a lot of Ephesians 4 lately, and especially based Ephesians 4:12 for us, but equipping the church. And I love how you're doing that. And how do you find, in Ephesians, when it talks about living a life worthy of your calling, because you've been called by God. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that and how you use that to equip. Yeah,
that's a great question. So there's so much rich stuff there in Ephesians 4. I love when it lists out the different kind of offices of the church, preachers and all that. The original language there talks about that those leaders are the gift to the church. It's not that they have spiritual gifts, that they're actually gifts to the church. That as people, they're gifts. And which I've often reflected on that. I've actually used that language with people, like, wow, you're a real gift to our church. Like it's amazing. You're given to us. And and I think, and then specifically Ephesians 4:12, this idea that as Christ followers, which I'm assuming if you've made it this far into the video, you probably follow Jesus, or you've found the wrong video on YouTube.
But welcome anyways.
We're glad you're here. We're glad you're here. But if you're a follower of Christ, we desperately believe that He's laid out a path for you to serve within the church. And the great thing about Ephesians 4, it's a great reminder particularly for folks that work in the church, that are like leaders in the church, that our job is to equip others to really help them live their best life, to help them fully engage, to be totally the person that God's called them to be. And we believe that a big part of that is serving within the local church, actually saying, hey, I want to give back. I want to exercise those muscles. And so, there's so much rich stuff there in Ephesians 4. And I love that, 4:12 obviously is based on, on that. It's fantastic. Love it.
And do you think for someone who maybe is sitting at home and they haven't served and they're like, I'd love to serve at church, I don't know where to start, how would you encourage them to figure out what their calling is? Like, what skills has God given them to equip so that we could equip them and so they can serve? But Where could they go for that?
Oh, that's a very deep question. We could spend a lot of time working on that. That's like, how do you help people find their path in 3 easy, pithy statements? Well, I would say there's 2 things. First of all, I do think that you, as a Christ follower, you've been given spiritual gifts. And so God has uniquely equipped you. He's given you this thing inside of you that needs to be fully expressed in the world around you, needs to be fully expressed in the church. And so that's a journey. I really do think, so there's lots of you can do assessments and take personality tests and all that stuff. And although that's fine, I actually think it's better to find your gifts out in community. That actually, you're better to find yourself in relationship with people who can affirm in you, who can say, wow, I see you as a communicator. I see you as someone with the gift of helps, or I see you with, the gifts of giving. Someone who I think it's more powerful when you find yourself in community to the point where then people can actually call that out of you and actually point that out. Hey, this is what I see happening in you. More so than a test. Sure, tests are fine, but they're impersonal as opposed to, I think the way gifts are supposed to be operate within the church is we're supposed to affirm them in each other. So then the flip side of that is, if you're leading in a church, we should be thinking about the people that we're leading through that lens and thinking, what do we think their spiritual gifts are? Those things that seem to have disproportionate results based on their effort put in, right? It's like God does, we put in the short distance and he goes the long distance, right? We do some small step and it goes a long way. And so, and then actually speaking that out to people. For whatever reason, the Western culture, we're just not good at that. We're not good at lifting up each other up and saying, I really see this in you. I see you, whatever that is. And so, yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. How are you trying to find out your spiritual gifting? I would say that's one way. Now, the other part of it, though, so this is, I would say, is like the other side of that coin, or the other, sharp edge of that, sword, is I don't want you as a Christ follower to be so obsessed with your spiritual gifts that you will not serve just out of a heart of service, because we follow a Savior who ultimately died on the cross, who we saw the night before his death. He was saying, Lord, if there is any other way, please take this away from me, which is a terrible thing to say. And he said it. Yeah. But where did he resolve? He said, but you know what? If there's no other way, then this is the way I'm going to go. And I think that should be the pattern of our lives in the same way, that we should come to service to our churches in yes, we want to understand what are our spiritual gifts, but we also should come with a towel over one arm and say, hey, how can I help? How can I plug in? What can I do? Connect with some leaders and say, I just want to serve. And it may not feel great, and you may be like, this is not, I'm not, we were picking on the grade 5 boys in the last episode, but I don't want to change diapers. I'm terrible at,
it's true, right?
stuff. I don't want to do that. But your church might need you to do that. And that's okay. That is a part of it. And I think we have to hold both of those in balance. I think both of those are a part of the equation. We should be pursuing what are our spiritual gifts, understanding those, trying to seek to understand those, asking people, your small group leader, pastors, people you trust, hey, what do you think? How do you see God at work in me? But then on the other side, also just being willing to say, I just am willing to serve. I'm willing to lean in. And a part of the process of learning your spiritual gifts is just trying stuff and learning. And so eventually you'll be like, yeah, that's definitely not what it is. And, maybe it's something else. So I think there's the 2 sides of that.
For sure. And I think definitely during the season, right? Serving has changed so much. And now, especially with online church, and maybe you find we need people to host an online service, right? And just to welcome people online. And maybe that's not something you want to do or you've even thought about before. But if we just came, and it's Philippians 2:5, you must have the same attitude as Christ Jesus. And I think if we just came with that attitude at everything we did, it'd be so effective, right, in communicating God's love to everybody.
Absolutely. There's so much joy and freedom there for people. I know as a parent, we've kind of said our motto for our family is help others. And actually at our house, we've moved a couple times through our kids' lives. We always, right at the door that they would leave, we have this sign that says that, help others. It's trying to remind us as we leave, that's our orientation in life. Our orientation needs to be other-centered. How do we live our lives focused on others? And that's really where we find freedom and joy. And that's how God designed it. That's how we're designed to live, which is so countercultural to the way, the world has us wired up, right? And that's, I would say, the one, my one concern with personality tests, spiritual, inventory, spiritual gift inventories, Enneagram stuff, all of that stuff I think is good and interesting, but it needs to be tempered with, at the end of the day, we're just called to serve. We're just called to lay down our lives ultimately. And laying down our lives might look like changing a few diapers, and it's going to be okay. Like that's going to be fine. You're going to survive. It's going to be good.
It's so true, right? You'll get through it, even if it's picking up garbage or welcoming people or whatever it may be. Yep. What is a verse that you find really encourages you, especially in thinking of serving or equipping others? What is a verse that just gets you fired up and ready to go?
Oh, that's a great question. So recently, it's not a verse, but recently I have been struck again by the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 and beyond. And particularly the life that Jesus is portraying there for us is just so, 2,000 years ago when he stood on that hill and proclaimed that, people turned their heads and they're like, what did he just say? Like, what is he talking about? And we're still saying that 2,000 years later, right? We're still wrestling with so much of what he talked about there. And, recently I was talking to a relative of mine who has walked away from the faith and is, no longer, would say they no longer identify themselves as a Christian. And I got in a fascinating conversation recently where, kind of out of the blue, they said to me, I really like Jesus. It's not that I don't like Jesus. Yeah. It's all the rest of it. It's all the, and so the shorthand joke I said, it's like, so are you saying it's like, you like Jesus, it's just his friends I'm not sure I like. And he's like, yeah, that's basically it. And I'm like, and so a part of what, even looking at the Sermon on the Mount again, has come a little bit through that lens of like, hey, I think we need to keep bringing people back to that. I need to keep coming back. I need to keep coming back to what is it that Jesus is calling us. So I would say that if you were going to, pinhole me, I would say that would be most recently what's kind of captured my imagination again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so great, Rich. And I love asking that question because it's so interesting how different passages have affected different people, right? And it always gives you a fresh perspective. And I love how it always brings the scriptures alive,
Totally.
right?
Yeah,
Which is so cool
Absolutely.
to see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how, right, we follow Jesus, but we understand him through scripture. And, it's fascinating, right, that this fixed text, I've joked with, so I'm not a teaching pastor, but I've spent a lot of time with teaching pastors and helping them with communication and stuff. And one of the things I've joked with lots of teaching pastors over the years, I'm like, you don't actually want to be too creative. Like you don't have to come up with some brand new idea, because if you're coming up with some brand new idea, chances are it's probably not biblical, because we do teach a fixed text. Like there are a fixed number of words, there's a fixed number of ideas. It's not open for let's just keep adding stuff to it. That's not how it works. But isn't it amazing that even though we keep coming back to these same words, these same ideas, just all the kind of amazing lessons we can pull out and apply to our lives, and the difference it makes in our lives is just amazing, incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I just was thinking, because you're so great at encouraging, and I know you do cards for people. Do you still do that, where you would write out encouraging cards to people?
Totally. Yeah.
And I just thought, how can you explain to us how you got started on that? For those that are leading volunteers too, especially through this time and making a personal connection and just, being the hands and feet of Jesus. What's a great way to do that?
Yeah, so take one step back to kind of the mindset side of it. I think as a leader, as a person who's choosing to lead folks, the people who are volunteering for us in this case, or working for us, or on our teams, we have to, our heart orientation needs to be, man, we are just so thankful that these people are choosing to serve with us. I think there was a previous generation that didn't have that attitude, that there was this idea that it kind of goes to the sacrifice thing, where it's like, you're just supposed to serve, just suck it up. What, I shouldn't have to thank you. I shouldn't have to provide a nice place for you to get donuts before and after. I shouldn't have to do that. Why am I doing that? Just serve. And I don't actually think that's God's orientation towards us. I think his orientation towards us is wow, when his kids take a step towards him, in this case in service, he is so excited by that. He lavishes he's so excited, he's fired up about that. Like we see with the parable of the prodigal son. The father takes a step back and the dad's like, man, this is amazing. So there's a mindset issue, first of all, which is I think you have to challenge yourself as a leader. What do I actually think? Now, the other part of it is functionally, everyone who volunteers with you, they have lots of other things they could be doing with their time. And we're going to see this in the next year as we try to recall volunteers to our churches. There were people who they just got in the routine of like, it's what I do every Sunday. I show up and I'm there for 5
just put their
hours.
time
and
in,
I do
right?
and it has been an unchecked part of their life. It's just a rhythm. And now they haven't done that for a while, and they're saying, I'm not sure I want to do that again. I'm not sure I want to give up that 5 hours. I don't think that makes them evil. I don't think that makes them like a terrible person. I think that's understandable.
It is, yeah.
I think on our side, we have to compete though and say with them and to let them know what we actually think, which is we're just desperately thankful for the fact that they serve. And so, thank you cards is a part of that. I think there's lots of ways to appreciate volunteers, but one of the things that has been a practice in my life is to try to consistently write letters and notes to people. And an easy best practice is if you're a volunteer leader and let's say you have like 8 people on your team, get all the addresses of those 8 people on your team, print them out on labels, put them on, get a bunch of cards, and do all this work at once. They probably take half an hour to pull all this together, stack them and put them on your desk. And then every week, just put it in your calendar. Monday, you take one of those out and you write a note and pop it in the mail. And don't worry about who's on the list. Just pull who's ever next on the list and keep sending them to people. Now, what I've found over the years of doing that is I have not come to a week where I pick one of those up and I'm like, there's not something I can't be thankful for that person for. There's not something where I could say, wow, I saw you do this and this is the difference it's making. That's all you're doing when you're appreciating people. I saw you did something and this is the difference it made. That's an easy thing for all of us to apply. You got to actually do it. It's one of those things that's easy to say. You got to actually get the cards and make all that happen. But I think there's lots of ways. Like I think, creating, and you do a great job on this, with what the stuff I've engaged with you on at the church. Like what's the environment like when people arrive? How do we, how do we make it a great, even here today, you've set out like donuts and stuff, which I don't really need, but like it's,
but we always want something
there's
nice,
a hospitable edge to that, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we've got to, again, people have other things to do in their lives.
Yeah.
Their time is super important to them. And so we want to go out of our way to make sure they feel that they know what we think of them. It's making that thing that's internal, external.
Yeah. And so what would you say to somebody who is leading volunteers to encourage them as they think about ways to reach out through this season? What would you say that would help them maybe take that step to send the card or set up a nice environment to connect with everybody?
Yeah, so we want to make sure, so one practical tip on this, as people come and serve again at your church, we want to go out of our way to articulate what to expect to our volunteers. We need to work really hard to, and this is the kind of thing that you and I may take just for granted, but it's always been a good practice to be really clear with people, like, this is the place where you can hang up your coat. This is the place where you can put your purse. I don't carry a purse, but this is the place where, this is, if you're, we have t-shirts, wear a t-shirt, all of those kinds of things. There are people who get actually a fair amount of anxiety around all those kinds of questions. We don't go out of our way to articulate that. It's not quite a training thing. It's like one step before training. It's just like, let me talk you through everything that's going to look like. Now, you could do that in the season by shooting a video, get your iPhone out, walk through, this is what the experience is like. It's even more important in this season, particularly, because things are a little different. All of our churches have little different protocols now, right? It's not just show up. You got to like get your temperature done. Well, even when I came here today, like I haven't been to Faith, I haven't been to the church here in this past year. And so I showed up wearing my mask and it's a question in my mind. I'm like, am I going to, like, I'm assuming I'm going to wear a mask. And so I wore a mask, I put one on and came in. But then as soon as I showed up, there's a station there with masks and, hand sanitizer and all that stuff. You're going out of your way to help articulate to people, hey, this is what, what it should look like. So a best practice in this season would be, if we're trying to recall volunteers, is to go out of our way to try to communicate, what should they expect as they come and serve in all our areas. That's like a general thing, but then specifically in all these areas, what does that look like?
Yeah, and I'm just curious, for those that are not serving, like in the last year, they have not come back to church, but maybe they're watching this and they're thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll come back out and serve. What would you say to encourage them?
Great question. So first of all, if you have taken a break from serving, I totally understand that. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot of time, effort, energy. Takes a lot of passion to make it happen. I understand that. I understand there's been hesitation on this. But if you were a friend of mine and we were sitting down across a table and you were to say to me like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe not serving, as a friend, I would lean in and say, because I'm assuming that you're a Christ follower and you follow Jesus, I would say, I think you're making a mistake for your own good, not for the church. The church doesn't, frankly, need you. I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say to someone, but it's going to go forward. So that's why you're thinking about not serving, because you're like, okay, it's going to be okay, and that's actually true. But for you as an individual, man, you are missing out. Why are you missing out? Because I believe deeply, and I think Scripture teaches this, and we just see this in the life of Christ, that our lives need to be oriented around other people. And we have just had an extended year where our lives have been oriented around ourselves. We have had an incredibly selfish year where we have just spent most of our time thinking about ourselves. And we've got to push back against that. You are going to have a small, shallow life if you just worry about what's good for you. So I would say you're missing out. We need you to lean in. Now, the other side of that, I obviously joke and say, and I would make that joke to a friend, like, we don't need you. But the flip side of that is the church actually does need you.
Yeah.
The reality of it is we have to find folks like you who are willing to come and serve and to be a part of the team that makes the mission happen. We have to find more of those people before the general public is going to be comfortable to come back. And so you might have some hesitation. And Jesus says, pick up your cross daily and follow me. Now, this is nowhere near carrying a mass punishment tool on my back. This is not what this is like. But you might get a small sliver of that. There might be some hesitation that's inside of you, and you'd actually get a little taste of what's it like to step out of your comfort zone a little bit, and that could actually be a gift from you, because frankly, in the West, we live very comfortable lives. If by definition, the fact that you're sitting watching a YouTube video now, your life is unlike anything of most people have ever lived in history. And we live such comfortable lives. But you know what? There may be an opportunity for you, if you're a little bit hesitant in this season, to actually live out what that means to take up a cross and lean in and say, I'm going to try something that I'm not totally comfortable with. And we need you to do that in this season, because we need you to serve before people will come back.
Yeah, Rich, that is so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And as always, it's a joy to be able to sit and talk with you and just pick your brain about volunteering and serving in the church as we are right now. So thanks so much. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. And for those watching the video edition, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss an episode. Also, hop onto the discussion by following us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at 412 Canada. Thanks so much for joining us.